We're live. It's
Yay.
happening right now. Hello. Welcome to I think this is our third main stage today. What a day. It's already been a big day. I'm super excited. We have Justina Ireland joining us here, and some other folks. And so I'm going to give us a quick panel intro. Jade Rogers is an educator, mentor, oral historian, archivist, adjunct professor at Metro Community College and UNO and Iowa Western. The founder, she's the reason we're all here. You know Jade. We love her. We like her. Lacey Lamar is a native Omahan that has worked in the healthcare and human services field for more than 25 years. 13 of those years were spent working with troubled Black and brown youth, and she is a humorist, a writer, and a future New York Times bestselling author. That's what Jade said. And Justina Ireland, our special guest, is the New York Times bestselling author of Dread Nation, as well as the sequel Deathless Divide, which are available wherever books are sold. Her earlier works include the fantasy young adult novels Vengeance Bound and The Promise of Shadows, and she also writes for the Star Wars franchise, which includes books Lando's Luck, Spark of Resistance, and upcoming Test of Courage. And we are just so excited that you are here today. Here's our applause. Yes. So how's everybody feeling? There's been a lot happening. Everybody in good spirits today? Are we happy to be here?
I have not watched the news.
We're happy to be here in this box. We don't want to be out there, but this is
Well, good. You don't have to be because we're here. So Justina, just to get it, I'm very interested, and I think a lot of people are, in just the genre of speculative fiction. So if get a quick and dirty, like, what is speculative fiction, and then what draws you to writing in that genre?
So speculative fiction is where all the cool things happen. It's where all the fun is. We have jetpacks, and we have time travel, and we have ghosts, and we have all those things. So speculative fiction at its base is just fiction that revolves around things that we feel either aren't yet possible or aren't possible based on what we know of the world. So you tend to have the two main branches of speculative fiction are, of course, science fiction and fantasy. But then you also have some kind of derivative branches, like horror is kind of in between the two and pulls from both fantasy and science fiction. And so generally what we see with speculative fiction is it's a space for us to explore ideas that we can't necessarily explore in contemporary fiction. So if we want to ask the question, what would it look like if the America that we see right now colonized Mars? You know, how would that colonization, look based on our current societal issues? Then we can do that in speculative fiction. It's also a place where we can ask questions like, if magic were real, and who would get to wield that magic, and what would that look like, and whose magic would be considered good and whose magic would be considered bad, and how would we make those quality decisions? So we usually take a question that we have within our current society or about ourselves. What does it mean to be a good person? What does it mean to be a human being? What does it mean to be a good member of society? And we usually overlay it with an element of the fantastic, whether it's fantastic science, or science that has not yet gotten there yet, because honestly, science fiction, science tends to catch up to science fiction, especially technology. We all remember, like, the first time we saw Star Trek and we're like, ooh, communicators, that's cool. And now we all walk around with our cell phones. So technology tends to catch up, whereas fantasy tends to be based in things that are not yet possible because we don't have the ability to create. Magic tends to create something out of nothing, or it is an exchange of energy, but that's more science. So yeah, so that's speculative fiction. I know people are like, that's confusing. If you're ever like, is it speculative fiction or not? The question is, can I do this next week? If the answer is no, then it's
That's a great test.
I love it.
Which sometimes is like voting. Can I do this next week? No. It might be speculative.
I was about to make a very similar joke, so I'm happy that we are on the same page here.
That's why I have always write about Black equality in my speculative fiction, because that's a great place to explore those ideas of things that people, the truths that some people believe about, especially the United States, compared to the reality that some of us live with. Speculative fiction tends to be a place where we can embrace that a little easier, because we don't have to get past that resistance of entertaining that thought. Whereas if you're writing contemporary, people will disengage with the material very quickly if it doesn't fit their very narrow, parameter of what reality looks like. Whereas speculative fiction readers tend to be a little bit more willing to go along with you on that conversation and on that ride.
Gotcha. I love it. And I love the ability it has to, even though it's something that couldn't happen tomorrow, like to use today and history to kind of engage in these conversations about what tomorrow could look like, which is super exciting to me. So you kind of touched on it a little bit, but like, how did you find this genre, and why is it something that you keep writing, and why is it something you keep pursuing, or the style?
Yeah, so as a kid, I was a huge reader, and I was always a huge reader of science fiction and fantasy and horror. But when I sat down to write, what I found is writing contemporary stuff was boring because I felt very hemmed in by the world around me. Because I mean, as a Black woman who lives in America, and especially once I started writing, I had just served in the military. I was in the Army for between 8 and 10 years, just about 10 years. And coming out of that experience, I couldn't see writing a Black main character as like the spy in a spy thriller, because there are like part of being a spy is being able to go places and not be noticed. Where as a Black woman, I've never walked into a store and not been noticed. So like it's like, how am I supposed to be a spy when everyone's like, "Can I hold your bag, ma'am?" And so like for me, it was always the real world was always very limiting and very restrictive. And so when I sat down and started writing, we can do some essays, and being an essayist is one thing. But when it came time to actually tell stories, I found that speculative fiction gave me the freedom to tell the stories I wanted to tell. And I think that's the hardest thing as a storyteller, as a writer, for people to find, is those stories that you want to tell. Do I want to try to write to whatever the topic du jour is? Am I trying to write very topical things? Am I writing romance? Am I writing space exploration? Am I writing hard sci-fi, which is really nitty gritty into the details of science? What do you want to? What kind of stories do you want to tell? And for me, the stories I wanted to tell were really about people surviving kind of untenable positions. Like, how do you thrive in a situation where it seems like everything is against you? How do you, get up day after day after day and do the same thing, hoping for different results? And for me, speculative fiction gave me that outlet. And I've always really loved telling stories where I can let my what if question go to the most extreme, ridiculous kind of extra places, because I'm a little extreme, ridiculous, and extra myself. So like, I want to be able to say, not just zombies, but historical zombies. Oh, but you didn't think about that,
right? They're zombies from the Confederate. Like what?
Old zombies. Old-timey zombies. Yeah. And so like, it's one of those things, like even now, even with newer stories I tell, I find myself going those same places. For me, I love history. I think people tend to see history as like fixed and staid and in the past. And I think being able to breathe new life into history, or death, as in the case of zombies, is really fun and exciting, and people aren't expecting it. So then when people aren't expecting those things, and they're so captured by the weird thing that you've done or the strange thing that you've done, they're more willing to listen to the conversations you want to have about, hey, what does it mean to be Black in this country? Hey, what does equality look like? Is America actually equal? Does everybody actually have the same opportunities, or is it just a thing we tell ourselves so we can sleep easier at night?
Yeah. Jade, as a historian and a blurb, this seems like the perfect intersection of your life. So what? So what? So what is exciting to you about the genre of speculative fiction? And we talk a lot of times about like correcting the narratives that people have about Black folks in America. And so how do you think that that speculative fiction could be used as a tool to kind of help in that mission as well?
What's interesting is people think that they know about history. Like, as far as Black people is concerned, people think they know about slavery. They think they know everything about it. We don't know anything. And when I'm teaching history classes, generally by the third class, well, actually the first or second, people are like, what? I never heard that before. And it's like, I know. Isn't that amazing?
Mhm.
So we have all of these rich, beautiful stories of resistance and that people don't know about. So when I am looking at my own life as far as loving science fiction and fantasy, to marry the things that are real that people don't know about with something that is a little, unreal. It's like that little bit of sugar to say, here, taste that. Now go back and realize that that thing that you didn't know is actually real. We just added a little bit of magic to it. That's what I like about speculative fiction. You can take the things that are real because we have fascinating stories, but people think that they already know everything.
Yeah. And Lacey, as a writer yourself, is what intrigues you about speculative fiction as well? Same question. I was going to try and rephrase it, but it's the same question.
Jade took my answer. I don't know if this is going to answer it, but the minute Jade, we were talking about what was going on in AfroCon, and she told me the book, and I am ashamed that I didn't know about Dread Nation. But when all she had to say was Confederate zombies. I don't know if you saw my mug. This is my ritual every morning that I drink on my Walking Dead mug with the baseball bat. I was there. I was like, I have to read this book now. And Jade was like, okay, I read the book. I love it. It just pulls you in. And even people, so I was talking to some of my friends who know that I'm a big geek and they don't care. They were like, that actually sounds really cool. And I'm telling them the book, it will pull you in. It gives, like you said, it's going to educate you, but then it gives you that little extra little taste. And I think it pulls people in that wouldn't normally think that's their thing. Like my sister would be like, that doesn't even sound real. And I'm like, but listen, it deals with racism, it deals with slavery and this. And then she's like, oh, okay. So I don't even know if that answers it, but it gives you that little extra something that will pull you in, and then, you're interested.
And I will add that Lacey is Michonne. I mean, especially during this month, she is Michonne.
I am. My dreads are out, but I love Michonne. She is my life.
So this is a more open question. So whoever would like to jump in totally can. I mean, with Lovecraft Country and Sorry to Bother You, all these fantastical things that apparently Black people can now be magical. But kind of as Jade and I have discussed, Black people have always been magic. Like mystics and fantasy have always been a part of our lore and our history. So why is this a new concept to folks? Like, why is it that right now people are like, oh, like Black folks doing math, that's so cool. Like what makes it new right now, even though it's literally our entire legacy?
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, it's happened.
Which way am I pointing?
I think part of it is because Black people have never been magical in service to themselves. One of the things that we look at the storytelling, the genre, and I am endlessly excited by the things that are coming out now as well. But the reason Get Out was so groundbreaking is, one, it didn't try to pretend like Black people, you're over worrying. You're overthinking it. It's not as bad as you think it is. It was like, no, it's exactly as bad as you think it is, and maybe a little worse. It validated that Black identity. The second thing it did is the Black dude made it all the way to the end of the story, right? Instead of dying like in the beginning, which is usually what happens with horror movies, right? It's like, I think the first time I saw a Black person make it to the end of a horror movie was Raw Digga in 13 Ghosts. And I was like, shh.
Mine was in Freddy versus Jason. Kelly Rowland was the second to last person to die.
Oh, second.
And that stuck with me. That has stuck with me for years. I haven't seen that movie in like a decade.
She
Yeah,
made it.
so I mean, like we could have a whole website of does the Black person die, right, in media, and figure out probably exists. I probably just haven't found it yet. And like that's our story. And I think when you do see Black people who are magical, you get like the Legend of Bagger Vance, you get the Oracle in the Matrix, you get these secondary characters who pop in magically to solve the main white character's problems and then pop out again. And now we're finally seeing Black characters who are there and they're using their magic for their own character arcs, for their own story satisfaction. We saw that in The Watchmen. We see that in Get Out. You see that in Sorry to Bother You. And Lovecraft Country has brought that all home with the history that Jade was talking about, the real history that people just don't know. Every episode for me is like, because my bachelor's is in history, and I was a history major until I became a creative writing master's. But like every episode is like, oh my God, they are talking about that. They're bringing our true history in for people, and you're not going to get that anywhere else. And that's what's so exciting about it.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm really excited about this question. Black people having their own stories.
That was the hope. I hope that you were excited about it so we can talk.
Right, because I mean, Justina, remember, your face is on the.
I'm just excited to talk about books.
Any other thoughts on that, like that piece?
No, but I just thought, oh, I came at this in the other way. I started as a very lit person, and I thought that was going to be my world. And then I realized that I loved literature not for the sake of literature, but for the history that was contained. So yeah. I went the other way.
Yeah, I love history because of the stories. Like, so I'm like, oh, I'm only here for the stories. Tell me the stories.
Yes.
It's
okay,
so
no,
funny.
Nick, back to you.
I was gonna say I love when people mention the magical Negro, because it's such a common trope, and you would think that at some point, like they would decide that. Well, and that's what's interesting is like Black folks are always brought in to save the day, but we're also often in most other media called the person that caused the drama. So what is that? Like why do they need us to both save them, but also see us as the problem? These are the hard questions, y'all. We're getting in today, okay?
I don't know.
I think it's a case of we can only save the problem if we're saving it the way they want us to save it.
Yeah.
Right? As soon as a Black character has their own agency and they're doing the things that are helping them, that's a problem. And like minor spoilers for that first episode of Lovecraft Country, second episode of Lovecraft Country, I think, when they actually go to the estate, right? Like they are so like Atticus, they are so excited. If you haven't seen Lovecraft Country, this is like not really a spoiler, it's a minor thing, but they are so excited to see him, his character Atticus, until they realize he's not going to do what they want him to do. And then as soon as that happens, he's the bad guy. And I think that's the case in most narratives that feature Black characters. It's like that Black character is useful and helpful and great and magical until that magic is no longer used in the service of the white characters. And then all of a sudden it's bad magic. It's bad magic. It's out there doing like bad there, right? It's out there doing crime at night. And so like, I just think it's so important for us to recognize those patterns in storytelling, because we fall into them as well, right? Because then like when a little girl is out on the beach selling water to make money for herself, all of a sudden that's a criminal behavior, right? But if she were selling that same water for like, you know, her church or some sort of like other charity, United Way or something, then it was okay. And I think we have to recognize those patterns because they make their way into our dialogue, our societal dialogue, the way we talk about people, especially Black people in this country, and like in the news especially, right? It's like, oh, like I live outside of Baltimore, so every morning in Baltimore, it's like, here's the murder report, and there's no conversation about like why people were shot or why the conflict happens. It's just like another Black person shot another Black person. What do you know? And I'm like, okay, but you're reducing them to that one idea of how you see it. Like you don't see the stories that are happening within that community of like why things are happening. If somebody, you know, like, and I'm not saying murder is justified, but some people deserve to die. Like sometimes in a story, the people who deserve to die are the people we're supposed to be rooting for. And that's what I think is hard for people to understand, is that I can make any narrative say anything I want, as long as I know how to envelop the topic. If I gave you, I could write Dread Nation and make Jane the bad guy, right? I could tell that same story from the perspective of the sheriff in Summerland or the mayor of Baltimore, and all of a sudden Jane is the criminal. And that's what happens to us every single day whenever we turn on the news or social media, is we're getting one version of that story. And the version of the story is usually the one that makes Black people look the worst. Mm-hmm. And that's for very concrete capitalist reasons, right? Because we used to be free labor, now we're not. And so that still impacts how our dialogue happens to this day.
Can you explain Dread Nation a little bit for people that don't know or are not familiar with your work?
Yeah. So Dread Nation follows 17-year-old Jane McKean. In her world, the Civil War, the Battle of Gettysburg, ends in the zombie apocalypse, right? So nothing is fixed, just like the real Civil War, nothing was fixed. They just stopped fighting, not because they're tired, but because zombies are eating their faces. And so she's born on a few days before the zombie apocalypse. So she's 17. So she has grown up in a world that has known nothing but zombies as a threat. And she goes to a school called Miss Preston's. It's kind of like half school of etiquette, half combat school. And her job is to go to this school and come out ready to protect white women. So, it's kind of that conversations you see in the late 19th century into the early 20th century about the virtuous white womanhood. We must protect the flower of white womanhood for a better America, combined with like the racism that we see even now of Black women have to take care of everybody, right? Like that expectation that you will always be the mammy and never the Michonne, right? And so I really wanted in the story to talk about now, but it's really hard to talk about racism now because people don't like that. So sometimes if you put like a historical and a speculative veneer on things, it's a little easier to have those conversations. And I do think we see that. I mean, especially with Kamala Harris. I always say her name wrong, and my husband makes fun of me because I say Kamala, because that's how I would want to say it. Kamala Harris. Is it Kamala? Pronounce it Kamala. I'm like, it's Kamala. But like we even see now, like she has to thread that needle between being a Black woman and being a strong political opponent, because as soon as she steps out of that very narrow line that Black women have to walk, she's going to be the angry Black lady, or the ungrateful Black lady, or the loud Black lady, all those things. And so that's kind of like for Jane, she's all of those things. And she's ungrateful because she's like, this system sucks. Like, this system is unfair. And why should I have to participate in this when I can see what the reality is? Which is not something we all have to go through at some point, right? Why do I participate in this system when I know it's inherently unfair? Sorry, that was a long answer.
No, that's great. I love it. And I find it actually interesting that you mentioned Kamala Harris, because she came to mind as well as you were talking about like Black women saving everything, which, I think even Carla, who's in a panel later, posted something that was like, there are things that we see as Black folks that people just don't see. And the way in which she was being cut off at the debate, the way in which like she ended up with less time somehow, even though she tried to fight for that same amount of time. And just like little things like this. And also like all the memes that are rolling around, everybody's like, oh, like, look, it's like, that's great. But like, you're now placing her back in this position of this Black face that you get to say, oh, look at what she did for us or for me. Like, she's our hero. Like, not even Joe, because wasn't nobody impressed by that debate performance. but they're like, oh, Kamala, like she's the one. Like, and so it's just I just find it interesting that we both brought that up in this moment. So Lacey, you look like you have a very intense question about Dread Nation, just like bubbling in your mind. I see it.
I have 8 million questions, but my first question is going to be like, where in the world did you come up with this? Like, what was that moment when you were like, I'm going to write about zombies and I'm going to write about the Confederacy? Like, where, when, what?
So I knew I wanted to write. So let me back up. I read Pride and Prejudice and Zombies when it came out long time ago.
Okay.
And like halfway through the book, I remembered I don't like Jane Austen. I was just here for the zombies, and they all kind of suck. And so then when the movie came out, I just reinforced it. But by that time, I'd already written the first draft. But as I was reading the book, I kept thinking about this idea of these really well-to-do women going to learn how to fight zombies. And it just like in my brain did not compute, because if you have to have somebody like get you dressed and sew you into your dress every morning, like ladies' maids were a thing, right? Like well-to-do women did not get themselves dressed. And I guess in some cases they don't do that now either. Even they have stylists and such. But how are you going to like be the person who's like badass going out and fighting? Because fighting is work, right? It's sweaty and it's gross and you stink and your hair is going to look like shit afterwards. So like, how did you expect that? How do we expect that to happen, right? And I couldn't suspend my disbelief, right? So when we talk about speculative fiction, the suspension of disbelief, that's when you get a reader past that initial like, that would never happen, to being invested in the story. And I never really suspended my disbelief, because all I could think of is, yeah, that takes place in England, but it would have been the ladies' maids who would have gone and been the ones responsible for fighting, especially since even into the mid 1800s, you know, rich people paid someone else to take their draft, right? Like that was a thing that we did. Like if you got drafted, and obviously it was only men, but if you got drafted, like you could pay someone to take your space in the draft. Like you could say, okay, I'm not going to go because that's war, but I'm going to pay you to go because I'm rich and you're broke and you don't have any other choice. And so I kept thinking about all these different like historical forces, and I was like, if we were in the United States, if the zombie apocalypse started in the United States in the 1800s, you know, first of all, where would I get the biggest bang for my buck in terms of body count? And that for me was Battle of Gettysburg. I could have picked like Antietam or whatever, but like who knows Antietam? Like, like people know Gettysburg. And the second thing I wanted to think is like, who would be responsible for this labor? Who is always traditionally responsible for labor? And traditionally in the United States, throughout our history, Black people have been responsible for that labor. And when we talk about emotional labor, especially with regards to white women, it's Black women. There's a reason people still think about what Oprah is telling them, right? Oprah has not been on the air for like 20 years. And people, white women are still like, what's Oprah say about racism? I gotta figure out. I can't think of myself, right? Because Oprah does that emotional labor for a lot of white women, especially, you know, white women in the suburbs. And so I started thinking about that, and that's how Red Nation came about. The first couple drafts, of course, were not a book that was eventually, you know, printed, but it was really about asking that question. It's like, what happens if you're the Black woman who has to do not only that emotional labor for like all the white people around you, but also like the physical, like killing the dead labor. And that's how we end up there. Plus I love history, and I always want to like put history in places. Even like in my Star Wars books, I'm like, here's the history of someplace else that you never saw before.
Oh God, love it.
It's amazing. I mean, well, I just think what. I just don't know why. I feel like a lot of Black folks are still waiting for permission to tell stories in this way. So what?
So I wish we had more. That's like my whole thing. It's like, I can't write all the stories, and like people are
Try.
like, but we definitely need more Black voices, because like I love Lovecraft Country. That source material is written by a white dude, and it's a mess. That original book is not that good. And like, you know, I love Watchmen, but that original comic is not that good. So like, I want that source material that is that awesome. Like, I want to read those books. I just read a book by Alexis Henderson called The Year of the Witching, and it was great. It was basically, you know, puritanical, like witchy kind of like world that we've seen before, but it was a Black woman going through it. It was written from the perspective of a Black woman. It was different. It added another layer to the complexities happening on the page. Because like we've seen, like, you know, what's the Handmaid's Tale look like from a Black woman's perspective?
Oh my God.
You know, like that's a whole nother level of conversation. And I think that's one of the things I'm excited about, is we're just finally getting more of those stories. You know, for a long time, I used to always joke. I was like, you know, for the longest time, all we had was Octavia Butler. That was it. And then like we got like some more folks, and like, you know, if you want to read vampires that were Black, that was L.A. Banks, and then she passed away. And then, you know, now we have, you know, for a long time, then we had N.K. Jemisin and Nettie Okorafor, and they're like, okay, that was it though. And so now we're finally getting new stories into the mix, and I think that's important. We need a diversity of experience, because even within Black women, our experiences are not all the same. You know, like my mom is white. I have a whole different set of baggage coming with me to this conversation than other people. You know, a whole different set of messaging that came into me as a kid than other people do. And so I think it's important to like realize that these stories, like there are so many more stories, and we just need to empower writers to write them and bring them to the table.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is a very important question.
Yeah.
You know, I'm going to speak it into existence when the movie comes out. Who do you want to play? Jane, Catherine, and Jackson. Who would you want?
So this is the question that people ask all the time. And you know what I would really love? I would love unknown actors.
Come on.
I would love completely unknown actors.
I will play Jane. Nobody knows me. So call me when they do it. I'll be a zombie. I'm going to be in there. I don't care. If I just walk by, zombie.
Yeah, no, I would love to launch someone else's career. I do think we are kind of like, people are like, wouldn't you like a Zendaya? I'm like, she's like everything. She is like the light-skinned Black girl who's in everything, right? Mm-hmm. I love Sky Jackson. Like, I think she's like, her Twitter presence is funny. She's like, she has no filter, and she just doesn't care. Which is funny because if you ever watched her like on her Disney Channel shows, she was like very cute and small.
Mm-hmm.
Now she's like, I'll out you racists. It's like, go get it, girl. But yeah, like I would love to see new careers. I would love to see new talent, because I do think there's, there are so many, and it happens in publishing too, right? Like I get invited to do stuff that I'm wildly inappropriately suited for, because they're like, well, we need a Black YA author. And for a long time, there was like me and like Danielle Clayton and like Tomi Adeyemi. Like those were the Black speculative authors. And and Elle, I can't remember Elle's last name. It's L.L. McKinney. And so like that was it. Like that was, and so I would get invited to do things, and I'm like, no, right? Like I got invited to write on a piece of IP that main character was Nigerian. I'm like, I'm not Nigerian. Like that's like, well, but you're Black. I'm like, no, that's not the same though. Like that's totally not the same. And so like I do think we need more voices, and I feel the same way with acting. I think we need more representation. I think we have like Lupita is like the Black lead in everything right now. We need more Lupitas. We need more Zendayas. We need more Sky Jacksons. We need more, just everybody, like more voices coming to the table. We were all sad when Chadwick Boseman died, but it wasn't just because Chadwick Boseman died. He was like our Black action hero, right? We can't pull Wesley Snipes out of retirement. He's old. Like he just got his taxes figured out.
Right. Listen, I was just about to say Wesley's still mad because Donald ain't paid taxes, and he
like Blaine don't pay taxes. But like, yeah, so like I mean, I feel like I always want more. I want more voices in the conversation. I want more people to the table, because I want us all to, I want, instead of, and there's a tendency, even once you get in, people like to try to keep other people out, right? So you're like, well, I might not have as much if I keep everybody else, but that's not true, because like the hunger is there, the appetite is there for those stories and for those actors and actresses to come to the table. So why not have more of it? More all Black everything.
Yes. I love that. No, as a casting director, I love to hear that, because usually it starts with like, what star? And it's like, why is that always the first part of the conversation? Like, I think we should, and it also allows the story to be highlighted if people aren't worried about, oh, how is Zendaya going to be in this thing?
Yeah.
It's just like, let's just watch this story unfold before us. I think there's power in that. So as we're talking about, like, something I've been talking about a lot in the Revolution, and I don't know if y'all know about theaters, but they're a hot mess right now. They don't know what they're doing. They don't know how to be better. It's a travesty. And so a question that I keep asking folks is like, how do we successfully create a pipeline to feed more talent into our art form? So same question for you about like in the writing world. Now I'll open to Lacey as well. And Jade's a writer too. All of you. How do we create that pipeline to kind of develop more of that Black, brown writing talent in all genres?
For me, I try to just do as much mentorship as I can, which is not always, I mean, it's kind of scattershot. I tend to, like, a couple times a year, I will open up on my Twitter, like, hey, if you have a query letter that you need to be looked at in like the first few chapters of your story, send it to this email address and I'll give you feedback. And most of the time people come to me, I'm like, okay, here's the things that I'm not seeing in your query letters you need. Here's the questions I have about your first five pages or first chapter. That I try to give a lot of away a lot of like knowledge. Because like I paid a lot of money for an MFA, but nobody else should have to because like I'm like I already paid for it, so you should get it for free. So like for example, next week, in preparation of NaNoWriMo, which is National Novel Writing Month, I'm doing a bookish boot camp, which is basically just like 14 lessons to prepare you to write a book. And we're going to talk about setting and craft and plot. I'm going to show you how to plot out a story so you have a nice outline before you start writing. We're going to talk about things like blocking within a scene and dialogue, just to get you like that basic, like the most basic level of information with craft, so that when you start out to write, that you have some of that knowledge. Because I do think like educating the people who are going to come behind us. I am not going to write books forever. Like I'm at one point I'm going to be old. I'm all I want to do is like sit on the beach and drink Mai Tais. So like I need to make sure that there's someone to take my place when I'm done, or to stand next to me while I'm here. And I think that the way we do that is we just share as much information as we can.
Exactly. Yes. I am not a writer. I know James going to get me. I wrote a book with my sister. I mean, I'm a writer now. I wrote a book.
You're a writer.
I'm a writer now.
Literally writing.
Literally, my sister said you've had. So my book is called "You'll Never Believe What Happened to Lacey." I'm writing it with my sister Amber Ruffin, and she's like, "These stories are crazy. We have to put them together." Amber goes, I've never written a book. You've never written a book, but let's try to make this happen. I reached out to a lot of people that I just knew that were writers. And I'm going to tell you, Jade was like the only person that was willing to help me. We met. I just remember I called you, Jade, and I said, I have to write about myself. And they want this and this and this and this. So Jade was like, sure, let's meet. I mean, so just like you said, Justina, helping each other, because I'm telling you, I reached out to maybe 5 people. Jade was the only one. How sad is that? So, and Jade came out with a chart and all this stuff. And I was like, I'm really serious about this. So yeah, I wish you would have had this boot camp for me, Justina, a year ago. I needed you. So yeah, just helping people. And now people are asking me, well, how did you write the book? How was the process? And I'm willing to share with everybody. It kind of saddened me that not everyone reached out to me when I asked for help. Mm-hmm. So Jade was one of those, one of the only people that was like, sure, I'll meet with you. We'll talk about this, this, and this. So it's just about helping other people, being willing to share your talents. You got to do that more. You just have to.
Yeah. I will admit I'm really bad about answering emails. So if people email me, I'm usually like, oh, I missed this. Up until the pandemic started, I had an assistant who was just basically like a student at the local college who like answered all my emails for me. And then like halfway through, I found out they were just like deleting the ones that I didn't need to see. I was like, oh, the abyss. But if it's who replies me on Twitter, I'm usually pretty good at, if I see the ats, I usually try to go through and see it and answer all the questions people have. Because I do agree. It feels like sometimes people get to a certain level and they're like, I don't need to help you anymore. Sorry, Jay, to cut you off.
No, you're fine. Because I've not finished my book, not any of them. But Lacey asked, and she needed to talk about herself, which is hard for us. Which I think is amazing that I could help somebody write. I don't know anything about any topic, about any person, but when it comes to writing about myself, you ask me to write a bio. It's like, I don't know. So we have a difficult time talking about ourselves, which I think also translates into talking about us and seeing the value in our stories. So most of what I do, and in answering your question, is allowing people to see their own value and their worth, and that their being, their existence on this earth, and their culture and their heritage and their history has value. And those are stories that should be told. I guess most of the stories that I do are in relation to history, and I'm an oral historian. So I gather people's stories. And when I'm interviewing people, they want to talk about other people that have influenced their lives and other things that, have impacted them, but we are very guarded when we talk about ourselves. One, because I know as people of color, as Black people specifically, when you put yourself out there, you could be hurt and harmed. And we learned that very, very early. So it's an untraining that we have to do to be able to talk about ourselves and position ourselves to be able to say, no, I can do that thing. So you should let me do this thing because, or I can do the thing. You don't even have to let me do it. I'm going to do it. We don't put ourselves out there like that. So when I'm doing oral histories with people and gathering their stories, they always are very, very shy and quiet about talking about themselves at first. And then when I start to validate, oh, that's amazing. Tell me more. Really? And then they go, and then the stories open up and blossom. So you just have to give people room to breathe, to know that their stories have value and they have value. Okay.
Yeah. So Lacey, as a new writer, what I'm going to ask what everybody ask you. What did you learn from that experience? And like, were there pieces of it that were actually like easier for you to get into than you thought it would be?
The hardest part was the stinking bio. I was like, I don't know what to put about me. I mean, they were like, oh, so then I started just reading people's bios and they were like talking about their dogs. And so I was throwing that in there, just weird things. But the bio was the weirdest part because my book is I am not writing about Confederate zombies. I'm not doing my book is just about racist things that have happened to me. So it was extremely easy. If anybody has anything bad to say, I'm like, this is just what it's about. It's the truth. It's going to hurt some feelings, but it's just literally a million racist things that have happened to me growing up in Omaha, Nebraska. And anybody can write. I'm not going to say anybody can write a book, but everyone has a story. And I've just had so many crazy, bizarre things that have happened to me. That part was the easy part. For me, it was just like, I have this story, I have this story, I have this story. We had so many racist stories that they actually fit into a book, which is crazy. But yeah. So that part was easy. It was just, like I said, the bio to me, it just made my hands sweat. I was like, oh, what do I have to write something about myself? This is bizarre. I just want to write my stories. I don't want to tell all the other stuff. So.
But Lacey is also extremely funny. Like Lacey's sister is a comedian, and I love Amber. Lacey is a comedian.
But this is what I wanted to ask, and this is not anything funny. Seriously, to Justina, we need to go because I feel like we don't have that much time left. The part in the book that killed me was the whipping. Like I had to stop because I knew it was going to happen, and I was like, I'm going to tear up because now you're like, I'm Jane. Like I'm in there. I'm like, oh my God, they're about to whip her. Was that the hardest part of the book to write or just the most uncomfortable? Like, tell me about that scene.
Oh yeah, that definitely. So like one of the things I did early in drafts is like I took out the N-word and they're all like, because I had the N-word in there. And then when I went back and read through like the draft after I had done it, I was like, I'm really uncomfortable reading this book. And like, who am I inviting into this book? If I'm inviting Black readers to this book, they're not going to want to get that every other page, right? We get that enough in real life. So one of the things I did was take that out. But the whipping scene I left in because I felt I would have done the people who had to live through things like that short shrift if I didn't include it. And it was one of the scenes that was actually the hardest to write. Like the first time I wrote that scene, it was like, and then there were 5 lashes and it was done. And it was just like, let me get out of this. And then as I went back through and I went back in writing it, I was like, I need to like dig into this. Like I need to make this painful, not just for Jane, but for the reader. Because you are going to have white readers who read that. And I didn't want it to be, torture porn. Like I felt like Colson Whitehead's Underground Railroad was torture porn. Like I felt like the book was attacking me on every single page and it didn't give me any of that enlightenment I'm looking for from a story. It just was like, hey, slavery was really bad and everything was awful. But I wanted to make sure that it mattered. I wanted to make sure that Jane's story mattered. So I had to make things hard for her. That's one of the reasons when people were like, is there a third book? And I was like, not right now, because like it's such a difficult world to write in. And especially when our world is so shitty, it's really hard. I'm like, let me go to this other shitty world and like try to make things like worthwhile and feel hopeful at the end of the day. So yeah, so like that's probably the hardest scene I've ever had to write.
Oof. Lacey, any other questions you're dying to get in?
Yeah.
Before we
I
pivot
think I'm
again.
okay. I think we're good. I mean, I have a million, but Justina, I'll call you.
Well, I'm just curious about what everyone has coming next in your life. What's next on the writing list? What's next on the where can we find people? I'm just everybody get some time to say before we do our last closing question. What's going on?
Justina.
Oh. So my next book comes out in January, and it's a Star Wars book, and it's a
Oh, that's so exciting. Okay, actually, real quick, sorry. Can we please talk about you writing for the Star Wars universe? What is that like? Like, and how did it feel to be approached about doing that?
It happened right before Dread Nation came out. Like they always talk about, authors always talk about that one book that broke you out. And for me, it's Dread Nation, which is it's actually the best worst problem to have, because it's like the book where I was like, Dread Nation was my kind of like FU publishing book, because I was out of contract for my first two books. I was like, my first publisher was Simon & Schuster, and I was out of contract. They didn't want any more books from me, and I felt like I had shot my shot and failed. And so I was like, I'm gonna put everything I love in a book, and they're gonna hate it. I don't care. This is gonna be for me. It was like my breakup with publishing book, and then like publishing was like, no, girl, we want you back. And so Dread Nation it was a couple months before Dread Nation came out, and an editor from Lucasfilm. Because of course, like that's what you want is editors who have read your other work before they ask you to write IP. Because again, I talked about that not being a good fit for things. Like sometimes you get offered things and you're like, there's no way I would write that. And if you read my books, you know that I'm not going to write like a Fox News book. And so like it's just not going to be in my wheelhouse. And so she had read Dread Nation and she loved it, and she wanted to know if I was interested in writing Star Wars books. And I said, sure. And it was like a hypothetical thing. Like you get asked to do a lot of things, and it's kind of like Hollywood, right? Where they're like, let's do this thing. And then it like fizzles and you never hear anything about it again. And then like 2 weeks later, my agent came back. They're like, yeah, they want you to write a Lando book. And I was like, I'm sorry, what? They're like, yeah, it's a Lando's kids book. And that was my first Star Wars book. I have it here because I love it so much, is Lando's Luck. And so it takes place shortly before the events of the Solo movie. And it just was like a lot of fun to write because I like Star Wars. I was always, a little disappointed that we got Lando and Mace, and that was about it in Star Wars. So now, we got poor sideline Finn in Star Wars. And so like, it was exciting for me to be able to write in that world. And it's really, it's just like writing other history, right? Because you have to know what came before, and it takes a lot of research, and you probably don't know as much as you think you do because like history, there's always something else that happened in some piece of media that you missed. So like, I like it. There's a lot of research that I do with every book. And I always learn something new. So it's pretty cool.
Were you always a Star Wars fan? Like, did you know everything about it?
No. I was like a casual Star Wars fan at first. And then like when the new set of movies came out, I was like, oh wait, oh no, I like this. And then I went back and ended up catching up with a lot of stuff. I had read like a couple of like the expanded universe novels when I was younger, but it was always one of those things that's like, it was always so vast and big. It felt like a thing that was too big. And then when The Force Awakens came out, my husband's a huge Star Wars fan. And when The Force Awakens came out, I was like, oh wait, I like this. I forgot I like this. And then I'm a difficult fan because my favorite Star Wars movie is Rogue One because I just like sadness. Like, war is sad. Why wouldn't it be?
So good.
Yeah, the movie is so good. It's just I've rewatched it like probably more than any other movie, and people are like, "Well, what about A New Hope?" I'm like, "A New Hope is fun. Yeah, it's great, but it's not Rogue One." You don't get that sitting on the beach knowing everything's going to end, and you're like, "Well, I did what I could," because that's how life is. Just like I did what I could, and I hope it makes a difference. So yeah, I love that movie so much.
Yeah.
I like Rogue One too. And I'm sorry to cut you off, Nick.
No, you got it.
Are you watching The Mandalorian?
Of course, yeah.
Okay. All right.
Baby Yoda.
You see Baby
Yoda.
Yoda.
Yes, I have
and Baby Yoda's behind you, Jane. So yeah.
Yes.
I see it. I see him. Yes. So one of the things I got a chance to do before everything like went, belly up was we did a launch for the High Republic, and we got to go to Disneyland, go to Galaxy's Edge. And I feel like if you are not a Star Wars fan and then you go to Galaxy's Edge, you're going to be a super fan because it's so freaking cool and it's so immersive. But I did get my husband a Tervis tumbler. It's like the child, and it's just like a giant like cup with him. He's so cute.
Yes,
You have to.
I know season 2. Let's the highlight. It's like at least season 2 is coming before this election because then I have that.
It's like next week, right?
Yeah, it's October 30th, I think.
Okay, because I think we're going to review it. We're going to review it on our we do Lovecraft Country reviews. I'm answering your question, Nick. We do Lovecraft Country reviews now, and then I think we're gonna do Mandalorian and the new John Brown series on Showtime.
Yes! That looks so good. David Biggs. And the kid that plays the Good Lord Bird is right? Is that what it's called?
I don't. Oh yes, I think so. I haven't seen it yet. I said after today. I got Showtime. I'm gonna just catch up.
I gotta finish watching all my HBO stuff so I can cancel HBO and pay for Showtime.
See, that's
I can't like carry all those premium channels.
He's not the only one.
I'm like, oh, that'll be on the streaming, right? I'll see that after I'm finished.
We just write them off at the end of the year. That's research.
Oh gosh.
research.
Real quick, there's a question in the chat that I'd love to bring up to all of you. It's from Adrienne Doran, who is a faculty art member, on the art staff at UNO. And her question is, if you are someone that is not a Black or brown person, how do you empower, or what suggestions do you have as folks that work with youth to empower, to give them tools to empower those people to really, to really what you say exactly, properly gas them up to be fearless in their talent and ideas? And I think that's something that's hard even as not a Black or brown person. So like, what tips would you give to someone on like helping Black and brown youth see their potential and like own it without tokenizing or coming from a different experience that you don't know what their background is, and that can happen for anyone. You don't know where they're coming in at. So what's some advice you might offer?
I mean,
yeah, that's back to you, Justina.
Yeah. I'm like trying to be so polite. I'm like, oh, I like to hear you guys talk.
No, that's quite wrong.
Yeah. I think you have to be honest. I think you have to tell them, like, I don't think you should say things aren't hard because things are difficult, right? Being like writing full time and like being able to make a living off of it is difficult. It doesn't mean you shouldn't try. And I think we empower a lot of our Black and brown youth to be certain things and not others. So like, I think we empower like, Black boys and girls, especially, to be basketball players and be athletes and be rappers, but not necessarily, academics. And I think one of the things you have to do is you have to show them that it's possible. I do a lot of free speaking engagements, especially at schools, especially lower income schools. And this is great. Like, I mean, COVID is not great, but it's great that we're going more virtual now because it allows me to do more visits. And one of the things I just do, I'm like, look, you can do it. And like, like Lacey said earlier, anybody can write a book. Like, for real, anybody can write a book. It's just a matter of finding the time and making yourself do it, which is kind of like anybody can write a marathon. I mean, I'm not going to, but but I could if I wanted to. And I think that's one of the things you have to realize is like, I don't think you downplay the difficulty of things, but I think you help people, you give them the tools to succeed despite the difficulties. And one of the things I always try to talk about is it's going to be hard. It's going to be racist. But we can still succeed despite that, right? You have to, you build allies. Like, you have to figure out who are the other people who are trying to go in the same direction as you. Like, bring them along, link up arms. You're better. It's easier. It's dangerous if you go alone, right? To use the old link, saying, take this, take a friend. You need skills, you need tools. That's where knowledge comes in. It's like, here, these are all the tools I have. I'll give them to you now, and like, hopefully, you can take them and make something with them. And I think we we try to open up as many mentorships as possible. One of the great things that young adult publishing has done in the last few years has really increased the number of mentorships. We have like Pit Mad, and we have DB Pit, and we have like all these different pitch things, and like where you can like work with someone. There was just one recently, I'm blanking on it. It was a bunch of younger authors of color who were like reaching out to people who are still aspiring authors, like, let me help you work on your book. And I think that's what we need to do. Like, building community is always, I think, the first step in empowering those younger ones, but also giving them the skills. And I think that's like, we just have to keep showing, like, we have to get out there and say, like, hey, you want to be, a Black podcaster? I'm a Black podcaster. Look at, this is what I do. And like, talk about, make sure people know that it's possible. You can do that thing.
Yeah. Yes. Because white people do all the time. White people decide they're going to do something and then just say, they just do it. So like there's no reason we can't do that.
How many like white people are all of a sudden, I'm a brand? I'm like, you got 10 followers. How are you a brand at 10
like, just because you got a camera do not make you a photographer. Stop it.
I'm a rebel.
Lacey, we have one more question in the chat, and it's actually for you. Javin Rogers says, when your book coming out?
I too have a book sitting next to me. Yay! But Justina, does yours have wine stains on it? I think.
I actually have one that has coffee stains, but it's over. It's my sad coffee.
So my book, it's coming out, and like, I don't know if you watched Amber's show. She said January 17th. We think it's just been, yeah.
Oh yeah.
January 17th. We're gonna say for
so
now.
People can pre-order it though, right?
They can pre-order it. But
yeah,
that's a good question.
She's a new author, folks. She's a new author. We're working on it.
I do have that information, so talk amongst yourself, and I'm going to.
And I will say, Justina, we have the Omaha Public Library did a story time this morning, and they have a booth in the expo booth, expo section, and they have provided a link for people to be able to get your book in the library. But would you also like to tell us where we can get your book? Where would you prefer if we wanted to buy it?
Libraries are awesome.
I mean, for those of us
like, save the libraries. Go to the library.
It's right. Everywhere.
Yeah. If you would like to buy a copy of Dread Nation, you can buy it just about everywhere books are sold. But you can also, if you want like a signed copy, if you go to my website, JustinaIreland.com, there's a link to my local bookseller, and there, like, whatever she has in stock, that's signed stock. But I'm always advocate, like, go to the library. I go to the library all the time because books are expensive, and libraries are awesome, and we should support libraries.
Yes, but we also have people that can support you. So we will have both.
I can get that sometime.
BrooklineBooksmith.com.
There you go.
BrooklineBooksmith.com.
Brookline Booksmith.
Where you can pre-order my book.
She's going to put it.
Talk amongst yourself. I was going to find it.
She's going to put it in the event chat. That way people can find that. Mm-hmm.
I will.
Yes.
There you go. All right.
Wow.
Okay, back to Nick.
I mean, this was amazing. I mean, I love nothing more than sitting in a room with amazing Black women and asking questions and going. And I mean that genuinely, because I think that the theme of today is finding space in the future, right? And I think that that space, not because it should be, but in my opinion, being raised by a Black mother and knowing Black women, it must be created by Black women, or it will not be successful in the future. So I just want to thank all of you for your time. And Justina, thank you so much for being here and sharing your thoughts about your book and Lacey, like, I'm so happy you got this moment to like ask your deep-rooted questions. And Jade, we just love you. Jade is the reason we're all here today. So yes, unless there are any final thoughts, I think that was a pretty fantastic chat.
I would concur.
Yeah. Well, cool. Thanks, folks. Enjoy the rest of AfroCon. Don't leave. It's not over. I promise. We got a lot happening.
Thank you, Justina.
Thank you, Justina.
Thank you, Justina.